I returned home from a business trip without telling anyone. I found my son in the ICU. My daughter-in-law was on a luxury cruise with her parents and her lover. "It's good to be free," she posted. That same day, I prepared her a surprise that, "I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that coming home 3 days early from a business trip would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. The key turned in the lock of my quiet suburban home, and I expected to surprise everyone with my early return. Instead, I walked into a nightmare that would change me forever. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet, too cold. My son Marcus's coffee mug sat abandoned on the kitchen counter, half full and stone cold. His work shoes were still by the door, but something about the scene felt wrong. Marcus was obsessively neat, always had been since childhood. He never left messes behind. I called out, but silence echoed back. My heart started racing as I climbed the stairs, checking each room. Empty. All empty. Where was everyone? Where was my grandson Tyler? Where was Azalea? Then I saw it. A hastily scribbled note on the refrigerator in Azalea's looping handwriting. Marcus at St. Mary's Hospital. Emergency. Had to leave town for family crisis. Will call soon. A. St. Mary's Hospital. Emergency. The words hit me like a physical blow. My hands trembled as I grabbed my purse and car keys, my mind racing with possibilities. What kind of emergency? How long had he been there? And what family crisis could have possibly taken Azalea away from her husband's bedside? The drive to the hospital felt endless. Every red light stretched into eternity. I kept trying to call Marcus's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried Azalea's number, and the automated voice told me the customer was out of service area. Out of service area? We lived in the heart of Chicago. How could she be out of service area? At the hospital, the ICU nurse looked at me with gentle eyes that immediately told me everything I needed to know. This was serious, life-threatening serious. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Nurse Patricia. Your son Marcus was admitted 4 days ago with severe pneumonia that developed into sepsis. He's been unconscious for the past 2 days. 4 days. 4 days my son had been fighting for his life while I was in Denver closing a business deal. 4 days while his wife was apparently dealing with some mysterious family crisis that took her completely out of contact. Where is his wife?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Nurse Patricia's expression shifted slightly. "She left yesterday morning. Said she had a family emergency and would be back soon. We haven't heard from her since." I stared at this kind woman, trying to process what she was telling me. Marcus had been unconscious for 2 days, and Azalea had left him alone in the ICU to deal with a family emergency? What emergency could possibly be more important than her husband's life hanging in the balance? "Can I see him?" Walking into that ICU room nearly brought me to my knees. My strong, healthy son looked so small in that hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed around him. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. I pulled up the chair next to his bed and took his hand, fighting back tears. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered. "Mom's here now." A young doctor appeared in the doorway. Dr. Martinez looked exhausted, like he'd been working around the clock. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm glad you're here. Marcus's condition has stabilized somewhat, but the next 48 hours are critical. We're doing everything we can. What exactly happened? How did he get so sick so quickly?" Dr. Martinez pulled up a chair. It started as what seemed like a mild cold. His wife brought him in initially, but they left when he seemed to improve. 3 days later, he collapsed at work. The infection had spread to his bloodstream. If his coworkers hadn't called the ambulance immediately. He didn't need to finish that sentence. I squeezed Marcus's hand tighter. "His wife was here the first 2 days," Dr. Martinez continued. "She seemed very distressed. But then yesterday morning, she said she had to leave for a family emergency. We tried to contact her when his condition worsened, but her phone goes straight to an automated message. That night, I didn't leave Marcus's side. I held his hand, talked to him, prayed harder than I had in years, and I couldn't stop wondering where Azalea was. What family emergency could be so urgent that she would abandon her husband when he might be dying? Around 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, I did something I'd never done before. I opened Azalea's social media on my phone. She had always been active on Instagram, constantly posting photos of her meals, her outfits, her daily activities. If there was a real family emergency, surely there would be some mention of it. What I found instead stopped my heart. Posted 12 hours ago, a photo of Azalea in a bright blue bikini, standing on the deck of a luxury cruise ship. Her smile was radiant, her pose carefree. The caption read, "Finally taking time for me. It's so good to be free." I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. While my son fought for his life in the ICU, his wife was on a cruise ship, celebrating her freedom. The timestamp showed she had posted it just hours after leaving the hospital. I scrolled further. More photos. Azalea at the ship's spa. Azalea at a formal dinner, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Azalea laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. And in several photos, a man I definitely didn't recognize. A man whose arm was around her waist, whose hand rested possessively on her shoulder. The final photo made my blood run cold. Azalea and this mystery man kissing on the ship's balcony, the sunset behind them looking like something from a romantic movie. The caption, "Some dreams are worth waiting for." I set the phone down with shaking hands. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into our family, the mother of my grandson, was not dealing with a family emergency. She was on a romantic cruise with another man, while her husband lay unconscious in the ICU. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever experienced. This wasn't just adultery. This was abandonment of the cruelest kind. Marcus had trusted her completely, loved her unconditionally, and she had left him to die alone while she celebrated her freedom with her lover. Looking at my son's pale face in the dim hospital lighting, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who had always tried to keep the peace, who had bitten her tongue countless times when Azalea was rude or selfish, who had made excuses for her daughter-in-law's behavior, that woman died in that ICU room. What emerged was someone I had never been before, someone who would not let this betrayal go unanswered. For the next 3 days, I lived in that hospital. I spoke to every nurse, every doctor, anyone who had interacted with Azalea during Marcus's stay. What I discovered painted a picture that made my stomach turn. Nurse Patricia was the most forthcoming. During a quiet moment, she sat beside me in the family waiting room and spoke in hushed tones. "Mrs. Morrison, I probably shouldn't say this, but your daughter-in-law's behavior was concerning from the start." I leaned forward, encouraging her to continue. When she first brought Marcus in, she seemed more annoyed than worried. She kept checking her phone, tapping her foot. When the doctor said he wanted to keep Marcus for observation, she actually rolled her eyes. My jaw clenched, but I remained silent. The second day, she was on the phone constantly, not with family or friends asking about Marcus, but planning something. I heard her say things like, "Are you sure the cabin upgrade went through? And I can't wait to get out of here." Patricia looked uncomfortable sharing this information, but I could see she felt Marcus deserved better. The morning she left, she didn't even say goodbye to him. She just gathered her things and walked out. When we called her about his condition deteriorating, her phone was already showing as international roaming. International roaming. While I sat beside my unconscious son, his wife was already on her cruise ship, probably laughing with her lover about how easy it had been to escape. That evening, after the nurses assured me Marcus was stable, I drove to my son's house. I had a key for emergencies, and this certainly qualified. I needed to understand how long this betrayal had been planned. Walking through their home felt like entering a crime scene. In their bedroom, Azalea's side of the closet was noticeably empty. Not completely cleaned out, but missing key items. Her favorite dresses, her expensive jewelry, her good luggage. This hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. I found her laptop in the home office, still logged in. My hands trembled as I opened her email. I knew I was invading her privacy, but my son was fighting for his life because of her negligence. I needed to know the truth. The emails told a story that made me physically sick. Messages dating back 3 months with someone named Derek. Love letters, planning messages, hotel reservations, and then the cruise booking. The cruise had been booked 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. She had been planning this romantic getaway for 6 weeks, knowing full well that Marcus would be alone if anything happened. But it got worse. Much worse. In her sent folder, I found emails to her sister complaining about Marcus. He's so boring lately. Always tired from work. I need excitement in my life. And then, 3 weeks ago, I think I'm done with this marriage. Derek makes me feel alive again. My vision blurred with rage as I read message after message detailing her affair, her complaints about Marcus, her excitement about starting a new life. She had been planning to leave him. The cruise was supposed to be her grand exit. Then I found the email that nearly sent me over the edge. A message to Derek from just 5 days ago. Marcus is sick, but it's probably just a cold. Perfect timing for our trip. He'll be fine by the time I get back, and I can deal with the divorce papers then. She knew he was sick. She knew, and she chose her romantic cruise anyway. I printed everything, every email, every message, every piece of evidence of her planning and betrayal. Then I found her financial records. Azalea had been living well beyond their means for months. Credit card statements showed charges at expensive spas, high-end boutiques, fancy restaurants that Marcus had never mentioned going to. She had been treating herself to luxuries while my son worked overtime to support their lifestyle. The cruise alone cost $8,000. $8,000 for a romantic getaway with her lover, while her husband paid their mortgage and believed she was a loving, faithful wife. I sat in their home office until nearly midnight, documenting everything. Phone numbers, email addresses, financial records, travel confirmations. I even found Derek's social media profiles. He was divorced in his 40s and apparently quite wealthy based on his photos of expensive cars and luxury vacations. As I gathered the evidence, I felt something I had never experienced before, a cold, calculating calm. The emotional Glenda, who would have cried and confronted and demanded explanations, was gone. In her place was someone methodical, someone who understood that emotional reactions wouldn't save my son or protect my grandson. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Richard Stern. Richard had handled my late husband's estate and various business matters over the years. He was sharp, discreet, and had no patience for people who took advantage of others. "Richard, I need to see you today. It's about Marcus and Azalea, and it's urgent." 2 hours later, I sat in Richard's office, spreading the printed evidence across his mahogany desk. He read through everything in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. "Glenda, this is damning evidence of adultery and abandonment. In Illinois, this kind of behavior can significantly impact divorce proceedings, especially when it comes to custody and support. What are my options? More importantly, what are Marcus's options when he recovers?" Richard leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Well, first, we document everything. Then we wait. She's going to come back expecting to find a grieving, grateful husband. Instead, she's going to find a man who knows exactly who she really is." What about Tyler? My grandson was only 8 years old. The thought of him being subjected to Azalea's selfish choices made my chest tight. Given her abandonment during a medical emergency and the evidence of her affair and financial irresponsibility, Marcus would have an excellent case for primary custody, especially with you as support. As I left Richard's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. For too long, I had watched Azalea manipulate situations, play the victim, make my son miserable while pretending to be the perfect wife. She had counted on everyone being too polite, too conflict avoidant to call her out. She had made one critical error in judgment. She had pushed the wrong mother too far. That evening, as I sat beside Marcus's bed, his eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. His voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. Where's Azalea? Where's Tyler?" I squeezed his hand gently. "Tyler is with your Aunt Sarah. He's safe. Azalea." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Azalea had to travel unexpectedly, but don't worry about any of that now. Just focus on getting better." Marcus nodded weakly and drifted back to sleep. But I could see the confusion in his eyes, the hurt that even in his weakened state he was beginning to feel. She would be back soon. Her cruise was ending in 3 days. And when she returned, expecting to find a household in chaos and a husband too grateful for her presence to ask difficult questions, she would instead find a family that finally saw her for exactly what she was, I wasn't going to confront her with tears and accusations. I wasn't going to give her the chance to manipulate the situation or play the victim. I was going to let her hang herself with her own rope. Azalea returned on a Thursday morning, her skin golden from Caribbean sun, wheeling a designer suitcase I'd never seen before. I watched from the living room window as she stood in the driveway for a full minute, checking her reflection in her phone camera before approaching the house. She used her key and walked in like she owned the place, calling out in a voice that dripped with fake concern. "Marcus, honey, I'm home. How are you feeling?" I emerged from the kitchen, where I had been deliberately waiting. The look on her face when she saw me was priceless. Surprise, then annoyance, then a quick calculation as she arranged her features into an expression of relief. "Glenda, thank goodness you're here. I've been so worried, but I couldn't get back any sooner. How is Marcus? Is he okay?" I studied her for a long moment. Her tan was deep and even. Her hair had been professionally styled. Her nails were freshly manicured. This was not the appearance of a woman who had been dealing with a family crisis. "He's alive," I said simply. "No thanks to you." Her eyes widened in what she probably thought was a convincing display of confusion. "What do you mean? I told you I had a family emergency. My aunt in Florida had a stroke, and I had to fly down immediately to handle her affairs. I tried to call the hospital every day, but the international charges were so expensive, and the connection was terrible." She delivered this lie smoothly, with just the right amount of distress in her voice. If I hadn't seen the cruise photos, I might have even believed her. "Interesting," I said, pulling out my phone. "Because according to your Instagram, you've been on a 7-day Caribbean cruise with someone named Derek." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint, but Azalea was nothing if not quick on her feet. "That's not. You don't understand. Derek is my aunt's neighbor. He helped me deal with the hospital arrangements, and when she died, he suggested I take a few days to recover before coming home. It wasn't romantic. It was just, stop." My voice cut through her babbling like a knife. "Just stop lying. I've seen the emails, Azalea. All of them." For the first time since I'd known her, Azalea was completely speechless. She stood there in her expensive cruise clothes, clutching her designer purse, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. "You went through my private emails?" she finally managed, her voice rising with indignation. "That's a violation of my privacy." "You had no right!" I almost laughed at her audacity. "Privacy? Your husband was dying in the ICU while you were celebrating your freedom on a cruise ship with your lover. You forfeited any right to privacy when you abandoned my son." "I didn't abandon anyone. I told you it was a family emergency." "Your family emergency was planning your affair for 3 months. Your family emergency was booking a romantic cruise 6 weeks ago. Your family emergency was deciding my son was too boring and you wanted to start a new life with Derek." With each accusation, Azalea's face grew paler. She set down her purse with trembling hands. "You don't understand our marriage," she said, her voice now desperate. "Marcus and I have been having problems. I needed space to think." "Space to think?" "He was unconscious for 3 days, Azalea. 3 days when the doctors weren't sure if he would survive. And you were getting spa treatments and posing for sunset photos with another man." I walked closer to her, and she actually took a step back. "But here's what you don't understand yet. While you were playing house with Derek, I was taking care of business here. Real business." "What do you mean?" I smiled then, and I could see it frightened her. It wasn't a warm grandmother smile. It was something else entirely. "I mean, I've documented everything. Every email, every credit card charge, every lie you told the hospital staff. I've spoken to a lawyer. I've gathered evidence that will ensure you never get a penny of Marcus's money or a single day of unsupervised time with Tyler." Azalea's legs seemed to give out slightly, and she gripped the back of the couch for support. "You can't do that. I'm his wife. I have rights. You had rights. You gave them up when you chose Derek over your wedding vows. Marcus loves me. He'll forgive me. He always forgives me." That statement revealed everything I needed to know about their relationship. She had been manipulating and betraying my son for years, counting on his love and forgiveness to protect her from consequences. Maybe he would have, I said calmly, if you had just been having an affair. But you didn't just cheat, Azalea. You abandoned him when he was dying. You left him alone in the ICU while you celebrated your freedom. That's not something any man forgives, no matter how much he loves you. She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic as she realized her world was collapsing. "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. For 3 years, I've watched you treat my son like he was your personal ATM. I've watched you spend his money on luxuries while contributing nothing to your household. I've watched you manipulate him with tears and tantrums whenever he tried to set boundaries." I paused, letting that sink in. "But most importantly, I've watched you treat my grandson like he was an inconvenience rather than your child. Tyler deserves better than a mother who abandons the family whenever something more exciting comes along." "I love Tyler." "You love the idea of Tyler when it suits you. You love him when he makes you look good at school events, or when you want to play the devoted mother role on social media. But you left him at Sarah's house for a week without calling him once while you played house with Derek." That hit home. I could see in her eyes that she knew it was true. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People make mistakes. That doesn't mean I should lose everything." "You're right," I said, and for a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. "People do make mistakes, but what you did wasn't a mistake, Azalea. It was a choice. A calculated, selfish choice that could have cost Marcus his life." I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet suburban street where Marcus had built a life he thought he was sharing with someone who loved him. "Marcus will be coming home from the hospital tomorrow. Tyler will be here too. And you're going to have to decide what you want to do with the rest of your life." "What do you mean?" I turned back to face her, and she flinched at the expression on my face. "I mean, you can try to convince Marcus to forgive you. You can try to gaslight him into believing that your affair was somehow his fault. You can try to manipulate him with tears and promises to change." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle between us. "But I'll be here too, and every time you try to lie, every time you try to manipulate, every time you try to play the victim, I'll be right there with the evidence of who you really are." Azalea stared at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. The meek, accommodating mother-in-law was gone. In her place was someone she had never encountered before. Someone who wouldn't be manipulated or fooled or pushed aside. "You can't turn him against me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I don't need to turn him against you," I replied. "I just need to make sure he sees you clearly. And once he does, he'll make his own choice about whether he wants to spend the rest of his life married to someone who celebrates her freedom while he fights for his life." As I watched the realization dawn in her eyes that her comfortable life of manipulation and luxury was over, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep exhaustion. This woman had nearly cost me my son. She had abandoned my grandson. She had taken advantage of our family's love and generosity for years. But now she knew that the rules had changed. And tomorrow, when Marcus came home, he would learn the truth about the woman he had married. Whether their marriage survived that truth would be entirely up to him. The next morning, I arrived at Marcus and Azalea's house early. I had my own key, and I intended to be there when Marcus came home from the hospital. Azalea was already in the kitchen, moving around frantically, clearly trying to create the appearance of the devoted wife preparing for her husband's return. She had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. Part of me wondered if she had spent the night trying to figure out how to manipulate her way out of this situation, or if she had finally grasped the enormity of what she had done. "Glenda," she said when she saw me, her voice carefully modulated to sound contrite. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. Maybe we can work something out. For Marcus's sake. For Tyler's sake." I set my purse down and looked at her calmly. She was still trying to negotiate, still trying to find an angle that would let her keep her comfortable life while facing minimal consequences for her betrayal. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I could end things with Derek. I could delete my social media accounts. We could go to marriage counseling. Marcus never has to know about any of this." The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence of her cruelty, she was trying to find a way to avoid accountability. You think I should help you lie to my son about the fact that you abandoned him while he was dying? It would be better for everyone if Marcus could focus on his recovery instead of dealing with this drama. You said yourself that stress could affect his healing. I stared at her, genuinely amazed by her ability to twist any situation to her advantage. She was actually trying to convince me that lying to Marcus about her affair and abandonment would be the compassionate choice. No, Azalea. Marcus deserves to know the truth about the woman he married. Her face hardened then, and I saw a glimpse of the real person beneath the carefully constructed facade. Fine. But you should know that I won't go down without a fight. I'll tell Marcus that you've been harassing me, going through my private things, trying to break up our marriage because you've never liked me. Go ahead, I said mildly. Tell him that, but you'll have to explain why all my harassment consisted of printing out your own emails and social media posts. The confident mask slipped again. She had forgotten that I had evidence, not just accusations. Marcus loves me, she said, but her voice was less certain now. Whatever you show him, whatever you tell him, he'll choose to forgive me because that's who he is. You're probably right about that, I admitted. Marcus has always been generous with his forgiveness. But forgiveness and trust are two different things. And once trust is broken, the way you've broken it. I didn't need to finish that sentence. She understood. An hour later, I drove to the hospital to bring Marcus home. He looked better. The color had returned to his face, and his breathing was easier. But he was still weak, still fragile. The doctor had stressed that he needed rest and minimal stress during his recovery. As we drove home, Marcus was quiet. Finally, he spoke. Mom, where exactly did Azalea go? Her story about her aunt doesn't make sense. Aunt Patricia called yesterday to check on me, and she seemed confused when I mentioned Azalea being in Florida. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I had hoped to have more time to prepare for this conversation, but Marcus was too smart to be fooled by Azalea's hastily constructed lies. What did she tell you about her trip? She said her Aunt Linda had a stroke and died, and she had to handle the funeral arrangements. But Mom, Aunt Linda died 3 years ago. I was at the funeral. I pulled into their driveway and turned off the car, my heart breaking for my son. Even in his weakened state, he was starting to piece together the truth. Marcus, there are some things we need to discuss when you're feeling stronger. I'm stronger now, and something is very wrong here. Azalea's been acting strange all morning, like she's guilty about something. And you, he studied my face. You look like you're ready to go to war. I helped him into the house, where Azalea was waiting in the living room. She had arranged herself carefully on the couch, tissues at hand, looking like a devoted wife who had been worried sick about her husband. Marcus, she exclaimed, jumping up to embrace him. I'm so glad you're home. I've been so worried. But I saw Marcus's body language. He accepted the hug, but didn't return it with his usual warmth. His eyes were watchful, analytical. How was your trip? He asked quietly. Oh, honey, it was terrible. Aunt Linda was in such bad shape, and the funeral arrangements were so complicated. I barely had time to think about anything else. Marcus sat down heavily in his recliner, his gaze moving between Azalea and me. Azalea, Aunt Linda died 3 years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Azalea's face went white, then red, then white again. She opened her mouth several times without making a sound. I meant Aunt Laura, she finally stammered. You don't know her. She's on my father's side. What was her last name? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Wilson. Laura Wilson. Marcus reached for his phone with shaking hands and did a quick search. After a moment, he looked up at his wife with an expression I had never seen before. There's no death certificate for anyone named Laura Wilson in Florida in the past month. Azalea's composure finally cracked completely. She started crying, but they were ugly tears now, tears of panic rather than grief. Marcus, you don't understand. There were complications with the paperwork, and I was trying to protect you from stress while you were sick. Protect me? Marcus's voice was getting stronger as his anger built. You disappeared for a week while I was in the ICU. The nurses said you left and never came back. They said you seemed more interested in your phone than in my condition. I could see that Marcus was becoming agitated, which was dangerous for his recovery. I made a decision. Marcus, I said quietly, I think you should see something. I pulled out the folder of printed emails and social media posts. Marcus took them with trembling hands and began to read. I watched his face change as he absorbed the evidence of his wife's betrayal, the hurt, the disbelief, the growing anger. When he came to the cruise photos, he went very still. You were on a cruise, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. While I was unconscious in the hospital, you were on a romantic cruise with another man. Marcus, I can explain this. He held up one of the photos showing her kissing Derek. Explain how you posted, "It's so good to be free," while I was fighting for my life. Azalea was sobbing now, but Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He was reading the emails detailing her affair, her complaints about their marriage, her plans to divorce him. You've been planning this for months, he said, his voice growing cold. You've been planning to leave me while spending my money on your affair. I love you, Marcus. I made a mistake, but I love you. Marcus looked up at her then, and the expression on his face made her step backwards. Love? He repeated. You left me to die alone while you celebrated your freedom with your lover. You spent thousands of my dollars on a romantic cruise with another man. You abandoned our son for a week without calling him once. He stood up slowly, his legs still unsteady from his illness. Get out. Marcus, please, get out. The force of his shout surprised everyone, including himself. Pack your things and get out of my house. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear your voice. I don't want your excuses or your lies or your manipulations. Azalea looked at me desperately, as if I might intervene on her behalf, but I simply stood there, watching her world collapse around her. You can't do this, she whispered. I'm your wife. This is my home too. No, Marcus said with finality. This was your home when you were my wife, but my wife wouldn't have left me to die alone. My wife wouldn't have celebrated her freedom while I was unconscious in the ICU. You're not my wife. You're a stranger who's been pretending to be my wife while planning to destroy my life. As Azalea ran upstairs to pack, sobbing hysterically, Marcus sank back into his chair. I could see the emotional toll this was taking on him, and I was worried about his physical recovery. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, I said softly. I'm not, he replied, his voice steady despite everything. I'm sorry it took me so long to see who she really was. 20 minutes later, Azalea came downstairs with 2 suitcases, her face blotchy from crying. Where am I supposed to go? She asked pitifully. That's not my problem anymore, Marcus said without looking at her. As she reached the door, she turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Marcus. When you realize what you're giving up, you'll regret it. Marcus finally looked at her, and his smile was cold. The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly sooner. After she left, Marcus and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he spoke. How long did you know? I found out the night I got back from Denver. I spent the next few days gathering evidence because I wanted to make sure you had all the facts when you were strong enough to handle them. He nodded slowly. Thank you for protecting me. And thank you for making sure I saw the truth. What happens now? Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking exhausted, but somehow relieved. Now I start over. But first, I need to make sure Tyler understands that this isn't his fault, and that he's going to be okay. As I watched my son begin to process the end of his marriage, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for his pain, but also relief that he was finally free from Azalea's manipulation, and underneath it all, a fierce satisfaction that justice had been served. Azalea had counted on Marcus's love and forgiveness to protect her from the consequences of her actions. She had forgotten that love without respect and trust is just enabling, and she had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman who had raised him to be better than she deserved. For 3 weeks after Azalea left, our family began to heal. Marcus grew stronger each day, both physically and emotionally. Tyler came home from his aunt's house confused but relieved to be back with his father. I stayed with them during Marcus's recovery, and for the first time in years, their house felt peaceful. but I should have known Azalea wouldn't go quietly. The first sign of trouble came when Tyler's school called. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, asked to speak with Marcus about a concerning situation involving Tyler's mother. "Mr. Morrison, your wife came to the school this morning demanding to take Tyler out for lunch. When we explained that she wasn't on the approved pickup list, she became quite agitated." Marcus's jaw tightened. "What exactly did she say?" "She claimed there had been a misunderstanding, that you were keeping her from her son due to a temporary marital disagreement. She was very convincing, very emotional. If our secretary hadn't recognized that Tyler's emergency contacts had been recently updated, we might have allowed it." My heart raced. Azalea was testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push before someone stopped her. "Mrs. Henderson, under no circumstances is Azalea Morrison to have any contact with Tyler at school. If she shows up again, please call the police immediately." "Of course, Mr. Morrison. We just wanted you to be aware of the situation." That evening, I was helping Tyler with his homework when Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Azalea's number. He had been ignoring her calls for weeks, but something made him answer this one. "What do you want, Azalea?" I could hear her voice through the phone, high and desperate. "Marcus, we need to talk. I've been staying with my friend Jennifer, and I've had time to think about everything. I realize I made terrible mistakes, but I want to fight for our marriage." "There's nothing to fight for," Marcus said calmly. "Our marriage is over. You can't make that decision when you're still angry. We have a son together, Marcus. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I watched Tyler's face as he heard his mother's voice. The confusion and hurt in his eyes made my chest ache. "Tyler means everything to me," Marcus replied, "which is why I won't let him grow up thinking it's acceptable to abandon people when they need you most. I'm his mother. You can't keep him from me. I'm not keeping him from you. You kept yourself from him when you chose Derek over your family." There was a long pause, and when Azalea spoke again, her voice had changed. The desperation was gone, replaced by something colder. "Fine. If that's how you want to play this, Marcus, I'll see you in court. I want half of everything, and I want joint custody of Tyler. My lawyer says I have an excellent case." Marcus looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. "Your lawyer is welcome to review the evidence I've gathered," Marcus said. "The emails, the financial records, the hospital documentation of your abandonment. I'm sure he'll find them very enlightening." Another pause. "You're bluffing. No judge would take a child away from his mother over one mistake." "You're right," Marcus said, and I could hear the steel in his voice. "One mistake might be forgivable, but you didn't make one mistake, Azalea. You made hundreds of calculated choices over months of planning. And all of those choices put your desires above Tyler's needs and my life." After he hung up, Tyler looked up from his homework with worried eyes. "Is Mom really going to take me away?" Marcus knelt beside his son's chair. "No, buddy. You're staying right here with me and Grandma Glenda. Your mom is going through some difficult times right now, but you don't need to worry about any of that." 2 days later, the papers arrived. Azalea was filing for divorce and demanding primary custody of Tyler, plus spousal support and half of all marital assets. Reading through her lawyer's arguments made my blood boil. According to the filing, Marcus was an emotionally distant workaholic who had driven his wife to seek comfort elsewhere. Azalea was portrayed as a devoted mother who had been forced to leave temporarily due to her husband's controlling behavior. The cruise was described as a therapeutic retreat recommended by her counselor to help her cope with marital stress. "She's rewriting history," I said to Marcus as we sat in Richard Stern's office reviewing the documents. Richard nodded grimly. "It's a common strategy. Paint herself as the victim and hope the judge doesn't look too closely at the evidence." "What are our chances?" Marcus asked. "With the evidence we have? Excellent. But Azalea's lawyer is smart. He's going to try to make this about Marcus's work schedule and stress levels, rather than her abandonment and adultery. What can we do?" Richard smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We let her make her case. Then we present the evidence and let the facts speak for themselves." The next few weeks were a nightmare of legal maneuvering. Azalea's lawyer scheduled depositions, demanded financial records, and filed motion after motion designed to paint Marcus as an unfit parent. But Azalea's biggest mistake was underestimating how thoroughly I had documented her behavior. When her lawyer demanded to see the evidence we claimed to have, Richard calmly handed over 3 thick binders of printed emails financial records, social media posts, and hospital records. I wasn't present for Azalea's deposition, but Richard told me later that she had been visibly shaken when confronted with her own emails. She tried to claim the emails were taken out of context, Richard reported, but it's hard to take "I think I'm done with this marriage" out of context. The turning point came when Azalea made a critical error in judgment. Desperate to prove she was a devoted mother, she decided to make a surprise visit to Tyler's school for his class play. She showed up wearing an expensive new outfit and dramatic makeup, clearly expecting to play the role of the wronged but loving mother. What she didn't expect was that Tyler would run off the stage crying when he saw her. The teacher who called us was clearly upset. Tyler was doing so well in the play, but when he saw his mother in the audience, he just broke down. He kept saying he was sorry, that he didn't mean to make her leave. My heart shattered for my grandson, but I also felt a cold fury at Azalea for putting him through this. Marcus left work immediately to get Tyler, and when they came home, Tyler clung to his father like he was afraid Marcus might disappear too. "Dad, did I make Mom leave? Is it my fault she went away?" "No, buddy," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "None of this is your fault. Adults make their own choices, and sometimes those choices hurt people we love. But that's never the fault of the child." That evening, Tyler asked the question I had been dreading. "Grandma Glenda, why did Mom leave when you were sick, Dad?" Marcus and I exchanged glances. We had been trying to protect Tyler from the harsh realities of his mother's betrayal, but he was smart enough to know something was very wrong. "Tyler," I said carefully, "sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love. Your mom made some choices that hurt your dad and hurt you, even though I don't think she meant to hurt you. But why would she choose to hurt Dad?" The innocence in that question nearly broke my heart. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his mother had simply stopped caring about his father's life? "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people change, and not always for the better." That night, as I tucked Tyler into bed, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Grandma, are you going to leave too?" "Never," I said firmly. "I will never leave you, Tyler. No matter what happens, you will always have me and your dad. Promise?" "I promise." The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Richard Stern. "Richard, I want to testify at the custody hearing." "Glenda, that's not necessary. We have enough evidence to—" "I want to testify," I repeated. "I want that judge to hear exactly what kind of woman Azalea Morrison is from someone who watched her in action for 3 years." The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. As the date approached, I could see Azalea getting more desperate. She started calling mutual friends, trying to get them to testify about what a good mother she was. She even had the audacity to call me directly. "Glenda, I know we've had our differences, but surely you can see that Tyler needs his mother." "Tyler needs a mother," I replied calmly. "The question is whether you're capable of being one. I made mistakes, but I love him." "Love isn't enough, Azalea. Love without reliability, without commitment, without sacrifice. That's not love, that's just sentiment. You've turned Marcus against me. You've poisoned him against his own wife." "I didn't need to turn Marcus against you," I said, echoing my words from weeks earlier. "I just needed to show him who you really are." The night before the hearing, Marcus found me sitting in the garden behind his house, looking up at the stars. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "No," I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm ready. I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't gathered that evidence—" "You would have figured it out eventually," I said. "You're too smart and too good to be fooled forever." "Maybe, but Tyler might have suffered more in the meantime." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "Do you think she'll ever understand what she threw away?" I considered the question carefully. "I think she'll understand that she lost something valuable. Whether she'll understand that it was her own fault, that's harder to say. People like Azalea have a remarkable ability to convince themselves that they're always the victim. What if the judge believes her story? Then we'll appeal, and we'll keep fighting until someone listens to the truth." But I wasn't worried about the judge. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and I was ready to make sure that Azalea Morrison never had the chance to hurt my family again. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and tired. Azalea sat at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, wearing a conservative navy suit and minimal makeup. She looked like she was playing the role of the wronged but dignified wife, and I had to admit she was convincing. Her lawyer presented their case first, painting Marcus as a workaholic who had emotionally neglected his wife and driven her to seek comfort elsewhere. They portrayed Azalea's cruise as a desperate attempt to save her mental health after months of marital stress. "Your Honor," Azalea's lawyer said in closing, "my client made an error in judgment during a period of extreme emotional distress. But to punish her by removing her child would be a grave injustice. Tyler Morrison needs his mother." When it was our turn, Richard methodically presented the evidence, the emails planning the affair, the financial records showing Azalea's excessive spending, the hospital documentation proving she had abandoned Marcus during a life-threatening illness. But the moment that changed everything was when Richard called me to testify. I walked to the witness stand feeling calmer than I had in months. This was my chance to speak for Marcus, for Tyler, and for every family that had been torn apart by someone's selfishness. "Mrs. Morrison," Richard began, "you lived in the same house with the defendant for several weeks during your son's recovery. Can you tell the court about your observations of her behavior as a wife and mother?" "I can," I said, looking directly at the judge. "For 3 years, I watched Azalea treat my son like he existed solely to fund her lifestyle. She spent his money on luxuries while contributing nothing to the household. She complained constantly about his work schedule while making no effort to find employment herself." "Objection," Azalea's lawyer interrupted. "The witness is offering opinion, not facts." "Sustained," the judge said, but I could see he was listening carefully. Richard adjusted his approach. "Mrs. Morrison, can you describe specific incidents you witnessed?" "I can describe many incidents. Like the time Azalea bought a $1,000 purse while Marcus was working overtime to pay for Tyler's school tuition, or the time she screamed at Marcus for being late to dinner because he had stopped to help an elderly neighbor with her groceries." I paused, letting that sink in. But the most telling incident was Tyler's 8th birthday party. Azalea spent the entire day taking photos for her social media, posing with Tyler like he was a prop. When he spilled juice on her dress, she locked herself in the bathroom crying about how he had ruined her day. Marcus ended up comforting Tyler while Azalea sulked upstairs. From the corner of my eye, I saw Azalea shifting uncomfortably in her chair. "Mrs. Morrison, in your opinion, what kind of mother is the defendant?" Azalea's lawyer started to object, but the judge waved him off. "I think Azalea loves the idea of being a mother when it's convenient for her. But being a parent means showing up when it's difficult, when it's inconvenient, when it requires sacrifice. Azalea has never been willing to sacrifice anything for anyone. Can you give the court an example? When Tyler was 6, he got food poisoning and was vomiting all night. Marcus was out of town on business, so it was just Azalea and Tyler. Instead of staying with him, she called her sister to come babysit because she couldn't stand the smell. She went to a spa day while her sick child cried for his mommy. I saw several people in the courtroom exchange glances. Even the court reporter looked shocked. "Mrs. Morrison, did the defendant ever discuss her marriage with you?" "Frequently. She often complained that Marcus was boring, that he worked too much, that he didn't appreciate her. She said she deserved better." "Did she ever mention Derek Williams?" "Not by name, but about 4 months ago, she started talking about a friend who understood her better than Marcus did. She said this friend made her feel alive again, made her remember who she used to be before she got tied down." Richard nodded. "Mrs. Morrison, when you discovered your son was in the ICU, what was your first concern?" "Getting to the hospital as quickly as possible." "And when you found out the defendant was on a cruise ship?" I looked directly at Azalea as I answered. I was horrified, not just because she had lied, but because she was celebrating her freedom while her husband might die. "What kind of person does that?" "Objection!" Azalea's lawyer stood up. "The witness is being inflammatory." "Overruled," the judge said quietly. "The witness may answer." "A person who never truly loved my son or my grandson," I continued. "A person who saw them as obstacles to her happiness rather than her family." When Azalea's lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as an interfering mother-in-law who had never accepted his client. "Mrs. Morrison, isn't it true that you never liked my client?" "I wanted to like her," I said honestly. "For Marcus's sake, for Tyler's sake. I wanted Azalea to be the woman my son thought she was. but you never approved of their marriage. I had concerns. Azalea had never held a job for more than 6 months. She had no savings, no career goals, no apparent interest in anything beyond shopping and social media. But Marcus loved her, so I kept my concerns to myself. Until now. Until she abandoned my son when he was dying. That's where I draw the line. The lawyer tried several more approaches, but I had lived through 3 years of Azalea's manipulation. Her lawyer's techniques seemed amateur by comparison. When the hearing ended, we had to wait 2 weeks for the judge's decision. Those were the longest 2 weeks of my life, not because I doubted our case, but because I knew how much was at stake for Tyler. The judge's ruling was more decisive than I had dared to hope. Marcus was awarded primary custody of Tyler, with Azalea granted supervised visitation only. She was ordered to pay child support and received no spousal support due to her adultery and abandonment. The house and all marital assets remained with Marcus. But the most satisfying part of the ruling was the judge's written statement. The court finds that defendant's abandonment of her spouse during a life-threatening medical emergency demonstrates a fundamental lack of character that makes her unsuitable for primary custody of a minor child. Azalea sobbed dramatically as the ruling was read, but I noticed she was also checking her phone. Even in her moment of defeat, she couldn't resist the urge to document her victimhood for social media. 6 months later, our new life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I had moved into the guest room permanently to help care for Tyler while Marcus rebuilt his strength and his confidence. Tyler was thriving, his grades improved, his anxiety lessened, and he smiled more than he had in years. Marcus started dating again, carefully and thoughtfully. He was determined to never again mistake neediness for love or manipulation for affection. Azalea exercised her supervised visitation rights sporadically. Sometimes she would show up, sometimes she wouldn't. Tyler learned to not count on her promises, which broke my heart, but also protected him from further disappointment. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Azalea's relationship with Derek had ended badly. Apparently, when he realized she came with financial obligations and an actual child who needed attention, he lost interest quickly. She was living in a small apartment, working as a waitress, struggling to pay her bills. I felt no satisfaction in her struggles. I had never wanted to destroy her life. I had simply wanted to protect my family from her destructiveness. One evening, as I was reading to Tyler before bed, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Grandma Glenda, are you glad Mom left?" I set the book aside and thought carefully about my answer. "I'm sad that your mom made choices that hurt our family, but I'm glad that you and your dad are safe and happy now." "Do you think Mom will ever be happy?" The question surprised me with its maturity and compassion. "I hope so, sweetheart. But people have to choose happiness. They have to decide to be grateful for what they have instead of always wanting something else. Like how I'm grateful for you and Dad." Exactly like that. A year later, I was sitting in the same garden where Marcus and I had talked before the custody hearing, watching Tyler play catch with his father. Marcus looked healthier than he had in years. The stress lines around his eyes had faded, and he laughed more easily. Tyler ran over to where I was sitting and climbed onto my lap, even though he was getting too big for such things. "Grandma, Dad says we might go camping this summer. That sounds wonderful. Will you come with us?" "If you want me to." "I always want you to come with us. You're our family." As I held my grandson and watched my son, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when I found Marcus in the ICU. Azalea had tried to destroy our family through her selfishness and manipulation, but instead she had inadvertently made us stronger. We had learned that family isn't just about blood relations or legal ties. Family is about people who show up when you need them, who put your welfare above their own convenience, who love you even when it's difficult. Azalea had never understood that. She had seen love as something she was entitled to receive, not something she needed to give. She had treated Marcus and Tyler as supporting characters in her personal drama, rather than as the most important people in her world. Now she was living with the consequences of those choices, while we were living with the peace that comes from cutting toxic people out of your life. I had thought that becoming a grandmother would be about baking cookies and reading bedtime stories. I never imagined it would require me to become a warrior, fighting to protect my family from someone who should have been their greatest protector. But I had learned something important about myself in the process. I was stronger than I had ever known, more determined than I had ever been, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting the people I loved. Azalea had made the mistake of thinking that because I was polite and accommodating, I was weak. She had confused kindness with weakness, patience with passivity. She would never make that mistake again. As the sun set over our peaceful evening, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a battle won and a family saved. Tyler was safe, Marcus was healing, and our future stretched ahead of us, bright with possibility. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to someone who has wronged you. Sometimes the best revenge is living well despite what they tried to take from you. And we were living very well indeed. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.